Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Mardiyah show. I am your host, Shadeed Muhammad, where we are meeting Muslims where they are. Tonight, inshallah ta'ala, we have a very important discussion that pretty much concerns us all, if not directly, indirectly. And inshallah ta'ala, we would hope that we have your undivided attention as well as your participation. At the end of the discussion, inshallah ta'ala, we'll leave some time. I have a special guest in the audience amongst you that I want to give an opportunity to speak to the topic. And for those of you who have any questions related to the topic, inshallah ta'ala, we will give you an opportunity at the end of this discussion to chime in. Our discussion tonight is racism amongst Muslims. And I know that there's a lot of people right now cringing in their seats. It's okay, stand in your discomfort. So let me begin with the introduction to this topic. Let me lay the groundwork, and then I will allow my esteemed panelists, my esteemed guests, inshallah ta'ala, to chip away at this topic, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, both from a social perspective as well as from a religious perspective. Since Donald Trump was elected president, America's race problem has taken a front seat at the table of many discussions. In the world of sports, with Colin Kaepernick, who you all are aware or should be aware of the fact that he took a knee. He took a knee during the national anthem to protest the killing of African Americans. There are TV shows that are on, TV today, like Blackish. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that particular program, which highlights many of the, race-related issues facing African Americans, and independent films like 13, which talks about the 13th Amendment, which allows modern-day slavery in the specific form or in the specific case of incarceration. If you read the 13th Amendment, slavery was abolished, except there's an exception there, there's a clause there, in the case of incarceration. So this is right here in plain sight in our Constitution. Right here in plain sight. And the thing is that a lot of people don't necessarily, especially Muslims, don't really consider these issues important until it actually affects them directly. Until their children are incarcerated, and now incarceration and, unjust incarceration now becomes, a topic of the discussion in the home because they have a child or children that is incarcerated. But as long as there's another culture, another group, another race, that is faced with this problem, it's really not a big issue, really not our problem in the Muslim community. Same thing with drugs. Drugs is not really a big problem until my son or my daughter is now getting high. Now we run to the imam, or we run to anyone that we think that can bring us some assistance or some closure to this situation, all right? And we need to stop that. These issues affect us all. There's no one group or race that is excluded or exempt from these issues. These are social issues. And this is very important because sometimes we chalk it up in the Muslim community as, well, if you were more religious, this wouldn't be happening to you, right? If you were more on your deen, you wouldn't be getting high, right? Similar to what our society does is incarcerate you for getting high instead of putting you into a place where you can actually get services, understanding that addiction is a disease, not a criminal act for a person to be penalized for. So there's a book that was written by an author named Michael Eric Dyson called Tears We Just Can't Stop, a sermon to white America, that talks about white privilege, as well as the hashtag that has gone viral on social media, namely Twitter, the hashtag being black and Muslim. I don't know if you guys are on Twitter or if these things are even an issue, but this hashtag has gone viral. And recently, there's another hashtag, black and Muslim in Britain, because they're experiencing the same issues there in Britain as well. So the American Muslim community seems to be a bit aloof to these events in their local mosques and Islamic centers, in that the subject of race is still considered taboo and oftentimes smothered with the counter arguments that there's no racism in Islam. How many of you have heard that one? Right. There's no racism in Islam, right? And we'll throw that out there as a counter argument to this uncomfortable discussion that we all try to navigate around. There is no more navigating around this. It's staring us right in our faces. There is no more navigating around this. There's no more tucking this under the prayer rug. This is a discussion that we have to have. It's staring us right in our faces. I don't know if you guys know, but there was a young sister who committed suicide just last week in Maryland, African American, and from what the reports that are coming out suggest that there was some racial undertones related to this. We can't completely say that it was racially, influenced, but it had something to do with it. And we can no longer, this is a child in our community that decided to take her life because of biases and unfair treatment that she is experiencing at the hands of Muslims. This is unacceptable. So, some will even cite the diversity of congregants in a particular community to cite that, to counter the fact that there's no racism in Islam. We say, well, our communities are diverse. That doesn't mean that there's no racism in Islam, because you have black, white, red, brown in a community, in a particular Islamic community. Because truth be told, some of these congregants suffer in silence on Eid. Converts to Islam who are completely overlooked and ignored and neglected in these Islamic communities. And don't let the subject of marriage come up. He's a new convert in a community that is predominantly a race other than his own, and no one ever stops to think and say, hey, brother, are you married? Never. Because, of issues that we're going to discuss tonight. However, it is undeniable that while we sing the We Are One Ummah anthem, there is an undertone of discrimination based upon race within the American Muslim diaspora, just by the way that some mosques are labeled. We have the Turkish mosque, the Albanian mosque, and this mosque, right? Just by the way that the mosques are labeled. So, moving forward, inshallah ta'ala, I want to start with the first question to my esteemed guests and panelists. And inshallah ta'ala, I'm hoping that we can bring some clarity to this subject. I'm asking that the panelists restrict their responses to between 5 and 7 minutes, inshallah. That will give everyone an opportunity to respond if they need to respond. Everyone doesn't need to respond to every question. I have certain questions that I directed to some of the shuyukh and some that are directed to other brothers on the panel that are skilled or have expertises in other areas, even if it is connected to our religion. So my first question is, why do Muslims avoid the discussion or the topic of racism? Our default response is that there is no racism in Islam, or we say we're all Muslims, or we say, I don't see color. We're all just Muslim, right? That's the classic, and that's actually racism in itself, if you didn't know that. It's called aversive racism. Subtle biases, right? It's not as overt as saying, I don't like you because you're black, I don't like you because you're Sudani, I don't like you because you're Palestinian, I don't like you because you're this. It's, we're all one race, we're all Muslims. I don't see race. Well, that statement in itself is racist. Why is the discussion of racism so difficult for the Muslim community? And I'll start with my right, starting with Brother Muhammad Mufti Munir, the one they call Mufti.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa sallallahu ala nabi. First and foremost, I have to thank Allah Azza wa Jal for Islam, for the Sunnah, for knowledge, for the desire to seek knowledge, for brotherhood, and a list that can never ever be enumerated of Allah's blessings upon me and upon all of us. That's firstly. Secondly, thank you, Abu Zubair, It's always a pleasure and an honor to be on the show. Alhamdulillah, thank you for inviting me again. Thirdly, I'd like to give salutations, peace, and blessings to all my disciples, wherever you may be in Allah's earth, here in New Jersey, Germany, Scotland, Pakistan, wherever they may be, we give you salutations. Last but not least, or getting started with the actual answer, I would say it's like you said. It's like an elephant in a room. Everybody knows that the elephant is in a room. It's the largest land mammal. It smells. You go to the zoo, everyone knows where the elephants are. You can't ignore, you can try to ignore, but you can't reject the existence of this huge animal in the room. Its sound, its size, its smell, it's reality. However, for one reason or another, it's taboo or it's swept under the prayer rug, as you said, for one reason or another. So, with that being said, such a broad topic, I would try to summarize the answer in a few basic points. The first point is that I think racism, every time it causes you to be sad or upset or downcast, it should make you happy. It should increase you in faith, and it should make you a stronger Muslim. Now, you may say, how is this? How does racism, and as we're going to get into the next point, that it can't just be secluded to racism because it's deeper than racism. But starting off with actual term racism should make you a better Muslim every time you encounter it, one way or another. And that's because our beloved Prophet ﷺ, he has told us. He says, "Arba'un min umur al-jahiliyyah." He says, "Arba'un fi ummati min umur al-jahiliyyah la yatrukunahun." Aw kama qala. He says, 4 things from the era of ignorance, of paganism before Islam, that is existent in my followers. 4 things are existent. And he says they would never, ever leave them off. Some Muslims will leave it off, but as a whole, there's going to be these 4 things. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, first and foremost, al-fakhru bil-ahsab. He says, is taking pride in one's genealogy. I'm from this tribe. I'm from this clan. My father was a warrior. My father was a scholar. My father was a poet. My father, my mother, my tribe. He said they'll never ever leave that off. Number 2, he says, وَالطَّعْنُ فِي الْأَنْسَابِ. The literal translation is to stab people's backgrounds. You're from this tribe, you're from this people, you look like this, you come from this country, you're from the south of the border, I'm from the north of the border. He says they'll never ever leave this alone, to the end of the hadith. So this is a prophecy. Muhammad ﷺ, he told us it's going to happen. People will think that they're better than others for no other reason except for blood, background, and appearance. So therefore, instead of me dwelling on the negative side of racism, alhamdulillah, I know that Muhammad spoke the truth. Because 1,500 years later, exactly what he said is happening, or what would happen is happening. So that's the first principle. The second principle I would say, and Allah knows best, is that it's deeper than racism. It's tribalism. There's colorism, which was just discovered from, the female doctor in India. When I was in India, I read a very, very interesting article on colorism. And of course, you hear about the caste system and the effects of the British colonizing of India. But when you go to India and you see it, it's like night and day. There is no Hilton at Persephone. You don't just walk through the front gates. You have a driver. You have to go to the first security stop, the second security stop. There's the security guard. There's the gardener, the guy who collects the trash. There's the waves of security until you get to the innermost desk of the hotel. And from the very beginning of the whole entire huge compound, the shades of color change. They get lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter and lighter until the top desk, the top person in charge of it is the fairest of the Indians. And the one that's the furthest out on the street is the darkest and the blackest. So this is something that you may read about, you hear about, you see in the movie, but it's not the same as seeing it in person. And the same applies in Saudi Arabia. You were there, you have Arabs, his skin is fairer than him. He's from Palestine, he has fair skin. He's from this tribe, he has olive skin or weak skin. And he looks at the Palestinian as if he's nothing. You're scum, you're beneath me, you're not even a real Arab. You're this and you're that, I have pure blood. So race, they're both supposed to be Arab, tribe, color, and the list goes on of these diseases. So I think we have to realize that it is reality. Number 3 is...
Can we come back to that?
Fadl.
I don't want to stop you. You're on a roll. But I do want to give the other panelists an opportunity to chime in on that. Brother Navaid.
طيب بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. I'm going to add it and do it in point form as well. Number 1, I think one of the biggest catastrophes is that we don't learn to sympathize and empathize until it strikes us ourselves. And I'm going to share examples from my own life. when I was first trying to get married, I proposed to a Libyan sister. And everything went really, really well. Everything was going forward. And then all of a sudden it just crashed and ended. And I said, what's wrong? What happened? And she's like, oh, my father said that he's changed his mind because his family said that we can only marry into the Arab culture. I told them that, look, I'm more fluent in Arabic than most of your family members. Why isn't that enough? And she's like, yeah, but you're not originally Arab. And I was like, there's not supposed to be racism in Islam. How could you do this? Like the dad was a very practicing guy, like an imam in the community. And then at the end of the day, it just came down to like a very fake fiqh justification. Oh, we have this thing called kafa in marriage, that there has to be compatibility. And, we might not be compatible because of that. I was like, we were both raised in North America. You can't use that. But I was like, you know what? I don't want to drag it on any further. Let it be.
Let me ask you, is that a real, and we're going to get to the fiqh aspect of it.
Of course.
Is that a real thing?
I mean, it's mentioned in the books of fiqh that there has to be an element of compatibility, but since when did the color of my skin become a lack of compatibility, right?
Right. I think what we need to discuss are what constitutes
compatibility. Exactly.
Right.
The second thing I'll mention is, Buna's going to be coming up tomorrow, but he has a line in one of his poems where he says, I'm black and I'm Muslim. Everywhere I go, somebody hates me. And I heard this all the time. But I never truly understood what it meant till we started traveling together. So we go to airport security, both of us get pulled over for secondary. However, when we went to the corner store, Buna was the only one that was being followed in the store. Like, I could have looted the whole store and run away. The lady wouldn't have batted an eyelash. Buna, he wasn't even doing anything wrong. He's literally being followed wherever he was going because he was presumed to be the thief. He was presumed to be the one that was going to do something wrong. So in my own experience, I think that really hit home. One, when it happened to myself. Number two, when it happened to someone that I love. And then you realize, oh my God, this is real. And I think up until people experience it themselves, we don't learn to empathize and sympathize. Wow. Number two, I'll mention that when something becomes normal, we become desensitized to it. I genuinely believe in signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So yesterday you sent us the questions, the whole day I was thinking about it. So I was waiting for the ESPN highlights last night to see what happened in the games. And as I was waiting, Seinfeld was on TV. And on Seinfeld, I can't even remember what the whole episode was about, but there's this one section where Elaine is in the restaurant, and the waitress comes, and she's a black waitress. And from what I remember now, she's the only time I've seen a black person on the show, and she's in the role of a waitress. And then Elaine says, thank you, my sister. And the waitress is like, my sister. And Elaine's like, oh, don't worry, my boyfriend's black. That was her justification of it. Wow. And the conversation gets even weirder because the boyfriend actually shows up and she's like, that's your boyfriend? And she's like, yeah, he's half black. And he's like, no, I'm not black. And she's like, you said we were in an interracial relationship. And he says, yeah, because I thought you were Spanish or Latino. And she's like, I'm not Latino. And then he's like, why were you always taking me to Latino restaurants? And she's like, because that's what I thought black people wanted. And this conversation just kept getting worse and worse. But I remembered something even more greater. Do you guys remember the only time an Indian and Pakistani was on that show? Who remembers the character? Babu Bhatt, exactly. He is an immigrant that doesn't speak English properly. He smells like curry. He owns a restaurant, and he gets deported for illegal immigration. That was how an Indian Pakistani one was portrayed. Now, when we saw these shows growing up, we didn't think twice about it. But now in hindsight, and I said this is like a sign from Allah, while I was contemplating the questions that you had sent and I'm watching this episode, I was like, La ilaha illallah, it has become so normalized that we don't even recognize when it happens in front of us. Black woman's portrayed as a waitress. Clearly racist conversation going on. No one bats an eyelid twice, but we laugh it off as if nothing's happening. So I think
in the guise of entertainment.
Yeah, in the eyes of entertainment, it is justified. So I think that's probably the second reason that I would like to share. Wallahu
okay. Brother Qasim.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Qasim Rashad. I am the Amir of United Muslim Masjid in Philadelphia. We have a major intersection of all races there. I don't have disciples like my brother Mardiyah. I'm a vegan Muslim, so that's probably the most peculiar time of year, Thanksgiving, for me, so that intersection is odd. But intersectionality is something that is at the core of racism. And it really requires an ability to kind of understand where you are as a Muslim And then the other intersections that you come across, being a female, being a black person, being a Pakistani person. And in our masjids, why aversion to racism is such a big thing, because we're not comfortable with it. But we're living in the era that is probably retroactive to 50 years ago. And that is an era of acute, extreme racism and poverty. And those are the two main intersections that we are experiencing, and that is not really comfortable for us to have these conversations. As Brother Shadid said, how many of you are aware of racism, or how many are cognizant of it, or black racism? I saw the black people raise their hands, and I saw it resonating with them. But it has not come to the point where within other members of our community that they're comfortable enough to talk about it or to discuss it. Now, we are in an era or an age of what we call social justice, and it's retroactive to a point where we were in the 60s. Black people are being murdered by white racist police officers, and it's becoming the norm. And we are desensitized to it, while these police officers get paid leave, paid vacations, and it is tantamount to state-sanctioned murder. We are paying our tax dollars to be killed by police officers. And so we must have these conversations, and they must become a point where we feel comfortable enough to come to a black Muslim, to come to an Indian Muslim, to come to an Arab Muslim. What are the things that are confronting you in your community? What are the things, because we're in Center City, but people come from the suburbs to worship with us. And so they are experiencing intersectional racism in their communities. And we have to become to a point where we are comfortable with dealing with this, with dealing with one of the most obvious forms of racism is racial color and black racism. But Indians experience it, Arabs experience it, and it's across the board. And until we become comfortable with discussing this in the masjids, Shadid was one of the first persons that did this. I think we had a town hall meeting after one of the main, I think it was Philando Castile, was murdered. And we actually did it live stream. And we actually told people to come in, talk, and get this off of your chest. Let's discuss the racism that is confronting not only black people, but Muslims in general. And until you can learn something from black folk, that is quite obvious, because we were here first, and we were one of the first ones to be subjected to this type of racism. But now it is widespread. The main, what did he say? The main sin of racism is what? Pride. And so until we can discuss these issues as a community, and that we can say, hey, I'm comfortable in my skin, comfortable enough to discuss this with you, and I recognize where you're coming from, and you recognize where I'm coming from, then we can begin that journey.
Dr. Abu Zaid.
Well, let me begin by pushing back a little bit about some of the things you said. In all the spirit of brotherhood, I'm on the same side as you. I agree there's a huge problem in our communities, but sometimes our language should reflect the nuances that exist in our communities. When you use language like some of these Islamic communities never ask a brother who's not from their ethnic group on the day of Eid, or so on and so forth, sometimes our language becomes so harsh, it drives people away, and it doesn't reflect the reality of the ground. Yes, there's a problem. We should also highlight the good. There's a lot of good in our communities, so and all the communities are very different in how they approach racism, how integrated people are. So just a point I wanted to mention. I agree with you 100%. There's a huge problem. I do a workshop on racism based upon my limited study. I'm a teacher of Quran and Hadith. When I look at the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, I find some amazing i'jaz. I'jaz is the idea that the Quran is miraculous. I also believe the statements of the Prophet ﷺ have this amazing, miraculous quality. When he addressed certain issues, he used a different style and format. So I do this workshop, and the communities I went to, or I've conducted this workshop, generally have been very open. So I haven't found a lot of resistance discussing these issues, and most of the communities are predominantly immigrant communities. So we should also highlight some of the good, and that should be reflected in our language. Secondly, the question you asked about why is it uncomfortable for people to discuss racism in many communities. The reality is many of the immigrant communities come from a position of privilege. And they're here to live the American dream. And I can say that because that's
back
the
up a little
community
bit?
I come from.
You said something profound. These are like key phrases here. You said they come from a place of privilege. What do you mean by that?
That means they come to this society as professionals. They were granted visas. Like in the 70s, a lot of Pakistanis came who had pharmacy degrees. There was a need for pharmacists. My dad came in 1979, and a lot of people of his generation came here, already educated, offered great jobs and stuff. I mean, there was a great struggle they went through initially working around the clock, but generally the immigrant communities in America are privileged communities. They came from a background of struggle, but ironically here, they're economically better off, they have better social standings. So that's why in their comfortable life, it's hard for many of us to address these issues. You know, it's like the elephant in the room, as Mufti said. It makes us uncomfortable. So that's something we should recognize, and that's part of our job is to call out in these communities, raise awareness that, look, life is meant to be complicated. Allah created us in hardship. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي كَبَدٍ. And all of these these immigrants that come from different backgrounds, the backgrounds they come from, they came out of brutal occupation, brutal colonization. So all of us shared a struggle. Nobody had a perfect life. But in America, somehow the immigrant communities are relatively in a better situation. That's why, you know, we really need to wake people up, and that's the job of people like us who live in those communities, who come from those backgrounds, and that's what we do day in and day out.
Jazakallah khair. Profound. Jazakallah khair. Abu Sumayya, faddal.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah. I want to hit this from a different perspective because I totally agree with Mufti that we find within the prophetic hadith that these things are going to take place. But the issue that I begin to have a problem with is when I look at it, when this racism affects trifold. One, when there's a benefit, the racism is put behind and not looked at. A benefit for the person who may be carrying out acts of racism. Two, when the racism affects a society to the point that they don't know what Islam is. And then the third is the savior mentality, that we're going to save you, and I'll give you examples of all three, and you can't do that for yourselves. The point of benefit, the first one where there's an interest when there's benefit, I can tell you in terms of disaster relief. Right now, my country, Puerto Rico, was hit with a hurricane, category 5, destroyed completely. One of the many things that we found initially is all types of organizations jumping up because there's money to be made. And one of the things when they contact us, because we're the first point of contact, because we speak the language, is that I had to clarify for everyone, listen, I don't want my people to be photo and video raped. Don't come to my country, take your pictures, collect hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then leave and not benefit my people at all. And to this point, honestly, all of those different organizations have yet to prove that they've done anything for the people of Puerto Rico. And people have begun raising money, and Allah knows best how much. The second point in terms of when there's an effect that affects the society, again, Puerto Rico, I use it because that's my place, my country. The Muslims have been there for over 5 decades. 3-4 generations of Muslims born there. We have 10 masajids in Puerto Rico, 5 built from the ground up, 5 musallas. And when you ask the people in Puerto Rico, where are the Muslims? They say, who's that? Those people who have this big building on Route 2, they go, oh, the Arabs. Why? Because there's no sense of giving back to the people whatsoever. The khutbah to this day, 5 decades later, still remain in the Arabic language completely. I went to Puerto Rico to give the khutbah, and they asked me, they said, Sheikh, can you give the khutbah in Arabic? I said, how would you ask a Puerto Rican in Puerto Rico to give the khutbah in Arabic? You guys speak Spanish better than me. You were born, raised here. I was not. I learned it in the States, among family. How is it that you're not affecting the people? At the airport just recently, the woman, as I'm renting the car, she finds out I'm Puerto Rican and I'm Muslim, and she says, I've never met a Muslim, and I have neighbors who are Muslim, who smile in my face the way you smile in my face, who've talked to me with kindness the way you've talked to me with kindness, who are not afraid when I speak to their wives that I'm going to take them away. The third, the whole issue of the savior mentality. I was in a conference, and I won't mention with whom, but it was about the Caribbean and South America and how to benefit them. And an individual got up and he gave a talk before I did, and he said, the Latinos have something to look forward to because my children are learning Spanish. I was like, put the brakes on, excuse me? Like, you just bypassed all of us. So our people now are going to be benefited because your children who are non-Latinos are learning Spanish. So they said, Abu Sumaya, we want you to speak. I said, really, I don't know if you want me to speak. So I told the brother, I got up and I said, listen, this is no offense. I don't want anyone to be offended, not here, not then, not now. I said, but our people are not, or they don't have a better outlook on life now because your kids are just learning Spanish. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to guide many of us who are on the ground doing that work, serving the people. We've been doing it, we'll continue to do it. And this is why our people have something to look forward to. And I told them, I said, as a Puerto Rican, we were colonized by America. I didn't become a Muslim to be colonized by Muslims. So I think
Allahu
those
Akbar.
points are very
Subhanallah.
important and very real within the community.
MashaAllah. And my last guest, Brother Hassan Akbar. Could you explain to our audience before you begin what your nationality is?
I would like to ask the audience what they think I am. You know, what do they think I am? You know, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. You know, after thanking Allah and thanking, you know, the host for having me here and you guys sitting so tentatively, you know, there are so many good points that were made. And of course, one of the drawbacks of being last is that everyone says the great points. But as well, you get more time to think of a response as well. That doesn't mean to start with me. Keep it going this way, inshallah. But, you know, one of the main reasons why I dress and take this style of fashion is because of this issue related to racism, in that, you know, many of us, when we begin to really practice this religion, we are drawn to this very Middle Eastern image of what it means to have knowledge. So having knowledge has a certain image, and then, you know, we strive for that. And I have found that the people, they become shocked and stunned when they come to find out that I'm actually Jamaican, that my family is from Jamaica. All of my relatives are from Jamaica, and that I'm a Black American. You know, and this, you know, hits me in different occasions. I remember one time I was given the khutbah, and a few Arab brothers came over to me, and they were inquiring about where I was from. And I told them that, you know, I was Jamaican, I'm Black. And they said, MashaAllah, you speak African American very well. Right? I said, Alhamdulillah. Because I know that what they're saying is coming from their intention is nice, their intention is good. You know, that's just the way that they worded it could be taken in a negative light. You know, but to answer the question or to add to this great, you know, ideas and points that were made, one additional reason why racism is so hard for us to discuss in the Muslim community is because of the privilege that we would have to admit that we receive, not being on the receiving end of the racism itself. What I mean by that is that we all experience racism in America and in our own native communities. It's not only African Americans who receive racism. I mean, I have made the mistake before, and I will never make it again, to ask a Pakistani person if he's Indian or to ask an Indian if he's Pakistani. I already know that's a line that we do not cross. But by admitting that there is racism, by having these discussions, one of the drawbacks is that you would have to admit that you are privileged. And that is not something very comfortable for one to admit. Because we all like to believe that we're all started at the same start line. You know, we all like to believe that we worked hard and we put in those hours, and we don't like to admit the handouts and the help that we received along the way. Because, you know, we all like a warrior story. Your grandfather started with nothing, and your father had nothing and no shoes, and all of these, you know, hero stories. But the reality is that although we may have worked long hours and we all have had our struggles, there are some of us who have received more help than others, and that would take away from what we perceive that we achieved. And another reason why we don't like to mention racism in the Muslim community is because we like to be comfortable knowing that we have an edge over our brother. And what I mean by that is, if you know that a particular society is looking down on a certain group, you don't want to be in that group. It is more comfortable for you to be outside of the group looking in. Even if you're speaking against the evil, you, in your heart of hearts, no one wants to be on the receiving end of any type of racism. And so we like to separate ourselves from it. And as well as separating ourselves from it, we begin to delude ourselves into thinking that it's not even real and it doesn't even happen. When you look at the beautiful thing about Islam, you find that the Prophet Noah alayhi salam and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as well as all of the Anbiya, that the rich and the affluent, what was their major criticism for not accepting Islam? It was that Islam put everybody on the same level. You want us to come into this religion and you have the slave equal to me? You want us to come into this religion and you have the woman equal to me? I don't want this.
Excellent
and so
point.
there is a deep-seatedness of not being equal with others, because each and every one of us, jumping off of the hadith that Mufti began with, that we have this belief that we are better and that our lineage is better, even if we don't vocalize it, and it only expresses and shows itself in the transactions and marriage and in other areas, and Allah knows best.
Jazakumullahu khairan. And there was actually an ayah in the Quran, in Surah Al-An'am, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَلَا تَطْرُدِ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُم بِالْغَدَاةِ عَشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ مَا عَلَيْكَ مِنْ حِسَابِهِم مِّن شَيْءٍ وَمَا عَلَيْهِم مِّنْ حِسَابِكَ مِنْ شَيْءٍ فَتَطْرُدَهُمْ فَتَكُونَ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. That don't chase them away, a tard. Don't chase those away who call on their Lord day and night, desiring nothing but the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have nothing to do with them in terms of holding them accountable, nor will they hold you accountable so that you chase them away. And this ayah was revealed about Suhaib, about many of the Sahaba Bilal that were not necessarily Arabs. And many of the chiefs of Quraysh, they came to the Prophet ﷺ and they said that if you want us to follow you, then you got to get these peasants away from you. We're not going to follow you if you have these people around you. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala admonished the Prophet ﷺ or warned him that the valor of your messengership, of your mission, is through championing the cause of the underdog, not advocating for the elite. Advocating for the underdog, not the elite. All right, so that leads me to my next point, and that was a very easy one. So now we're going to get into something a little more difficult. So Abu Sumayya mentioned that he was Puerto Rican. You have a diverse group here, all right? And I did this purposely because I wanted to throw this question out here, because a lot of times as African American Muslims, we're oftentimes scrutinized or looked at as if we're not really Muslim because we try to maintain some level of identity with our cultural background. So you're not, anything is almost like anything black is un-Islamic. Anything that is black. And the funny thing about that is that people who are not African American, are not black, they appropriate black culture. So now you find Yemeni kids in Brooklyn, New York, wearing baseball caps. You can't tell them apart from Puerto Ricans or Hispanics. You can't tell them apart. You didn't even know that he's Yemeni. He's wearing, the fitted cap. He got on, the Montclair goose, you know what I mean? Like he got on the foam posits and he's out of pure. Good. But you can't tell. So it's almost like a double standard. It's like people who are not African American, they get to enjoy the perks of black culture. But when an African American becomes Muslim, he has to almost commit cultural apostasy in order to be accepted in the Muslim community. Do you guys understand? Everybody's black till the police show up. It's all good, right? Until shots get fired, the police pull up, right? No, I'm just being honest with you. And you'll see that even today with many rappers. You have, what's his name, Moroccan brother? French Montana, who's Moroccan. You have DJ Khaled, who is Palestinian. Classic case of appropriation of African American culture. Here are people who come from an entirely different culture, but you would not even be able to tell them that they're not African American. And that's acceptable. That's acceptable. But when an African American converts to Islam, he has to put on a thobe, and he has to adopt now a different culture in order to be considered a real Muslim. I have walked into stores owned by Yemenis, have on a thobe, and have a brother say, "Are you Muslim?" It's like, why else would I be wearing this? Am I Muslim? I'm probably more Muslim than you are. And you're asking me, am I Muslim? You're selling liquor in your store, for crying out loud. You sell pork, and you're asking me, am I Muslim? Can you recite Quran, brother? It's just like, you understand? Do you guys understand where I'm coming from? What were I doing to the liquor store? It's a bodega. They sell everything. A one-stop shop. They got everything. All right, so my next question is, does Islam recognize cultural diversity within its faith? Meaning, when a person converts to Islam, or a person is born and raised Muslim, are they allowed to maintain their identity, their cultural identity? Or does Islam come to replace their culture, and they no longer have a connection to any particular culture, and their culture now becomes Islam? And I'm asking that because this is what I was taught when I first became Muslim, that I was not allowed to be an African American. As a matter of fact, I know African American Muslims who say that they're not African American. I'm Muslim. While you have people from other cultures, Pakistani can wear the two-piece Pakistani outfit, Arab can wear, his traditional thobe, right? An Egyptian can wear the traditional Egyptian thobe, right? And they're allowed to have some connection. When I first walked in, mashallah, there was a brother from Saudi who offered me some kahwa. He said, "You want some kahwa Arabi?" I said, mashallah, you got kahwa Arabi here in America, right here. But the point that I'm making is that you see so much pride taken with people and their culture, and it's almost like when people from other cultures, and I don't know if Abu Sumayya, if you experienced that as a Puerto Rican, and Hassan, if you experienced that as a Jamaican, but I know that I experienced that. I can't speak for everyone else. Does Islam allow for cultural diversity, meaning for people to maintain their cultural identities, and to what extent does it consider and or allow cultural norms and traditions within the framework of Islamic sciences such as fiqh, jurisprudence, and usul al-fiqh? And if you guys could bring some examples, if it is the case, that people are allowed to maintain their cultural identity within the framework of Islam. If you could bring some examples for that, if in fact that's the case. And I'll start back to my right again. Mufti.
I feel, Allah knows best, and in my humble opinion, it's a yes and a no answer. Islam clearly allows, and in certain cases may even encourage, cultural diversity. And I feel there are other instances and other rulings in which Islam clearly aggressively wishes to eradicate certain cultural values of the past. There's no doubt about that. Yes and no. So the panelists, they can explain better than I can, but we all know that the scholars of Islam, they mention several maxims, as the word you brought up, maxims, qawa'id kulliyah. And oftentimes they mention 5 of them that are like the top ones. And from these 5 major fiqh principles, and for those who don't know, or those who know, to give further benefit, a fiqh principle, a qaida fiqhiyya, is totally different than usul al-fiqh. A qaida fiqhiyya is basically a universal, timeless proof that can be used for 1,000 issues that weren't explicitly mentioned in Kitab and Sunnah. It is like a timeless dalil. A dalil for something that didn't exist in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and the mufti, the mujtahid, can go back to this one major principle for 1,000 different modern day issues to come. All right? So from these major principles, is that what people now say? إِنَّ الْعَادَةَ مُحَكَّمَةٌ. They say that the custom is the judge. The tradition is the judge. What's normal, what's practiced, that is the judge. I.e., in other words, when there isn't explicit text from Kitab and Sunnah, explicit text from Quran and Sunnah on how to do something and how to physically implement a general or inexplicit command. So an example of this in brief would be وَعَبُدُ اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Al-ayah. Allah says in the 36th verse from Surah An-Nisa, the verse which is known as Ayatul Huquq al-Ashara, the verse of the 10 main rights. Allah mentions the rights of 10 classes, or if you want to say, quote unquote, 10 people, quote unquote. The first is Allah's rights. Worship Allah, make no shirk with Him. Then Allah Azza wa Jalla says, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, and then treat your parents kindly and honorably. So, an example of this principle would be, where I come from, buying my mother a dozen of roses is honorable treatment. Where you come from, treating your mother or your parents honorably is taking them on Hajj and Umrah and carrying them on your back or pushing a wheelchair. Where he comes from, treating one's mother honorably is buying a brand new car. And the list goes on. So we have certain commandments with regards to one's mother. فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا uff. Mother and father, don't say uff to them. But in general, there aren't too many specifics of how one is to deal with his mother and father. But there is a ton of general and explicit commands. Treat the mother kindly. The mother, man ahaqu bi husni suhbati, who deserves my good treatment the best? Ummuk, 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 etc. So we have a good amount of commands that are inexplicit of good treatment of one's parent. But the details of treating one's parents correctly, kindly, honorably, let alone the mother, there aren't too many. I.e., it goes back to the custom and the culture.
So basically what you're saying is that the command to treat your parents honorably is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the details of how that should be carried out could possibly differ from one culture to the next.
Without, indefinitely, 100%. With the condition that the custom doesn't infringe the Kitab and the Sunnah. Somebody may be from the Far East in which you bow down to your parents or prostrate to your parents.
Kiss them on the forehead is a classic
example. What's important is this rule with regards to one's parents, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, treat your wives kindly. With regards to your clothes, your food, your diet, your recreation, whatever you want to do, as long as it doesn't go against Kitab and Sunnah. It's just that simple. And anyone who promotes other than this is going to fall into inconsistency and contradiction. So I like to wear lime green, or slime green as they say. He likes to wear brown. He likes to wear tan. He wears white. There's no prohibition on that. Prohibition on pure silk. Certain hadiths, even though they're not authentic, about pure red. Certain, the narrations on the isbal, وهكذا. But once you get rid of these clear, explicit prohibitions, it's open. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, he was asked, the man came to him and says, ماذا يلبس المحرم? He says, what does the pilgrim wear? What should a pilgrim wear? Listen to as Dr. Abu Zayd said, the ijaz, the miraculous nature of the Prophet's words. He says, what should the muhrim wear? Obviously, you're expecting the Prophet to say, the muhrim, the one who's making Hajj should wear this. No, he didn't say that. He says, لا يلبس المحرم. He says, the muhrim should not wear. And then he mentioned a list of things, pants, hoods, this, and that. I.e., anything that doesn't fall under these prohibitions, wear whatever you want to wear. Color, style, as long as it doesn't fall under these prohibitions. So the Prophet ﷺ's words, مَنْ يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. When Allah wants good for a slave, He gives him knowledge of deen. That is the light of this whole entire concept. Is that what is haram, what isn't? Do I have to wear a thobe? Do I have to wear a turban? Can I be proud of my culture? If it doesn't go against the text of the Kitab and the Sunnah, then you're free to do it.
MashaAllah. Allahu Akbar. Do you guys hear that? So you have some people who are in a habit of superimposing their very, very limited understanding of these very important matters. I mean, identity is everything. Being able to identify with where you come from without it actually conflicting with where you are as a believer amongst other believers. That's important. And to have a whole group of people who are conflicted about their identity as Muslims, that's a problem. And so, alhamdulillah for that, explanation. Sheikh Navayyid?
I'd mentioned the verse in Surah Al-Hujurat, ayah number 13, the ending of which where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us into tribes and nations so that we may better get to know one another, and the best amongst us are those that are most conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intentionally created us into different people, and there's no virtue of one nation or tribe over another except through the virtue of taqwa. So what this shows is that we're meant to embrace our identity regardless of where we're from. And we see this in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when revelation first came to him, do we have any record of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam changing his clothing? We don't. Islam did not come to change his clothing. All of the companions that accepted Islam, as Mufti was mentioning, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam never changed their dress code up until it violated one of the sanctuaries of Islam. So they embraced that identity. Now, one thing I want to address with what you were mentioning is that when an African American becomes Muslim, he's told to change his dress. And I think this is a problem with various movements, that they've established like a uniform for their movement.
Right.
So we give two clear examples. If you're Salafi, you're going to wear thobe. We went to Medina, you had to wear the white thobe or you stuck out like a sore thumb. And if you don't wear the red shimagh, your manhaj is criticized. You're not Salafi enough. You join Jamaat al-Tabligh, okay, you need to start wearing shalwar kameez. If you're not wearing shalwar kameez, you're not Tablighi enough. So there's this huge emphasis on the external without addressing the internal issues. We address the external issues before we address the internal, when Islam came to do the opposite. Right?
Wow.
Islam came to change the internal, not the external. The external will change over time through knowledge, but the emphasis always needs to be on the internal.
MashaAllah, tabarakallah. Qasim?
Assalamu alaikum. The traumatization of racism is very impactful, and then how you come into your own cultural expression. But as the Sheikh said, no one wants to be at that bottom rung. As an African American, I mean, if I had a nickel for every African American who said they originated from a Native American tribe, I'd be rich. And black people know that. we know that. And so when I took Shahada, change your name, Donna Khamis, wear a thobe, be an Arab. And we did these things until, I reflected on something once and I said, well, if I'm in the Maghrib, I take zabiha halal meat and I put it in my couscous. If I'm in Japan, I do the same thing with the zabiha meat and put it in mugu gai pan. In Hungary, Hungarian goulash. I'm in South Philly. The best thing to eat is a zabiha halal cheesesteak. And so we learned to accept and embrace our culture out of what we love and through necessity. and then we grew to be comfortable within that. But the racism and the shaming that comes with that racism often has us to kind of subjugate ourselves and to become something as a Muslim that Allah Ta'ala never intended us to be.
So basically, using our modern vernacular, culture shaming. We shame you for, identifying with your culture, but when we find it convenient for ourselves, we'll appropriate the culture, right? We'll appropriate it. And this is unacceptable. To make someone feel ashamed of identifying with their culture. And as all of the panelists are kind of alluding to, as long as identifying with these cultural values and norms does not conflict with the Quran. Obviously, when it conflicts with the Quran, then it becomes a problem. Then it becomes a problem, Dr. Abu Zayd.
I don't have a lot to add, but on the topic of shaming, just some funny stories. Growing up, I've been to, the 90s was the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, very interesting time in the Muslim community. I've been to many masajid where entering the door, I've been told, and my friends, wearing pants is haram, and we weren't allowed to enter. So many of us have experienced that. Funniest shaming story I have, my wife's brother memorized Quran. When he graduated, they had a ceremony, and I wasn't familiar with this particular group. It was in upstate New York. So they had a ceremony when the children memorized Quran. Some of their sheikhs come and they put a turban on their head. So we were invited. So that day I wore a black shalwar kameez. So we arrived in this town in upstate New York, and I saw hundreds of people wearing white shalwar kameez, and about 80 to 90% of them had a white turban on. So I entered the masjid, so you can imagine the scene. There's 4 or 5 sheikhs. Everyone's dressed the same. What are they wearing? White, not so shalwar kameez. I'm the only one wearing total black, head to toe. So I'm sitting there, everyone's staring at me, and at the end of the program, one of the scholars there came up and he took me to the side. He said, "Brother, these are the clothes of the people of Jahannam." And I said, "What are you talking?" He said, "This is all from the books. If you want dalil, I have the dalils. What you're wearing are clothes of the people of Jahannam." So we all go through that. That's a problem where urf goes wild. These are people who've taken their urf, their custom, to the extreme, and now they use their custom to shame other people.
To shame other people, right? And it's almost like in the Islamic University, I had a thing where from the very early stages that I would never go through the airport with a thobe on. I would always just put on regular pants. And I was ashamed of being seen by other students of knowledge who were coming through the airport who proudly wore their thobes. And, the sad thing about it is that this is almost like a green light to talk about you, to backbite you. Oh, the brother had on pants, astaghfirullah. And it's like, I'm shamed for wearing something that I've been wearing all my life. You understand? Like, this is what I've been wearing all of my life. I remember visiting one of the mashaykh in Medina, Sheikh Ali Nasr al-Faqihi, hafidhahullah ta'ala. And we were at his home, and some of the brothers came to make umrah, and we, as we used to take the brothers to go visit some of the shuyukh there. And this same discussion came up because the imam was on the mimbar at the time telling everyone in the masjid that this is a Jumu'ah khutbah. Jumu'ah khutbah. Maybe 200-300 people in the masjid. And he's telling everyone that if you're wearing jeans, it's haram, and your salah is not accepted because you wear jeans. We're not talking about women, we're talking about everybody. Haram if you wear jeans, and your salah is not accepted on Jumu'ah, on the mimbar, in front of hundreds of people. I mean, can you imagine how people felt walking away from that khutbah? Ashamed that here I am going to the masjid, going to the mosque on Friday to receive services for my soul, to have someone tell me that, nope, still not good enough. You got on jeans, your salat is not accepted. So we asked the sheikh, Some of the brothers were offended by that, didn't necessarily agree with him, and wanted clarification. So I posed the question to the sheikh. I said, you have many brothers amongst us who believe that if a person wears jeans, his salat is not accepted. Is it haram for us as American Muslims to wear jeans? The sheikh, his son, was outside in the house area playing with the basketball. It was in the summertime, his door was open. His sons, two of them were outside playing, and they had on shorts. One had on shorts, the other one had on jeans and a t-shirt. And they're playing soccer in the house area. So the sheikh said, if you look outside and you see my children, he said, my children, I would consider that imitating the kuffar. He said, I am from Saudi Arabia. I am a Saudi. My father's a Saudi, my grandfather, my great-great-grandfather. He said, this thobe has been our custom since I could remember. This has been our custom here in Saudi Arabia. Our custom is not to wear jeans. He said, so if there was anyone that would be imitating the kuffar, imitating non-Muslims, it would be my children who are outside playing. He said, you all come from America. You were born and raised in this country. You were born and raised wearing jeans, wearing pants. That is your custom. That is your culture. Wearing a thobe is not your culture. It's not your culture. It's our culture. You guys following me? And it took a scholar thousands of miles away and a whole nother country and a whole nother environment, a whole nother culture to clarify that to us as Americans. I mean, just think about the logic in that. So, passing it on to Sheikh Abu Sumayya.
You know, I'll just give you an example that for me, I grew up in the African American community. As Puerto Ricans, we have African in our blood, and my great-grandmother was black, right? But growing up in the African American community, I faced what you faced as well. And when I accepted Islam with my family, that took the da'wah and put me 10 years behind.
How?
Put me 10 years behind because when I came in, walked in with a thobe and with a change, and they're like, you know, what is this? You know, family starts calling my other family like, yo, we think your cousin, your family member, he went the other way. He's wearing dresses now, right?
Wow.
And it shut them down because it was, you became an Arab now. It wasn't I became Muslim. It was you became an Arab. What, aren't you Puerto Rican? And it set my dawah back about 10 years. And it is the very reason why now as us as Latino leaders with the generation coming up, we teach them, look, be very key on how you present Islam to your family. Don't drop your culture as long as it doesn't go against Islam. Keep your culture. Let your family see that you can be a Muslim and you can be a Puerto Rican. You can be a Muslim and you can be a Dominican. You can be a Muslim, you can be black. And if you don't, you're going to set your da'wah back. A funny story, just to show one of the mashaykh, he said a Caucasian brother accepted Islam in a Pakistani masjid. They gave him the shahada, they took him to the basement, gave him shawar qamis, dressed him up, kuhl on his eyes, he went home. Knocked on the door because he forgot his keys. Wife looks through the door. Honey, it's me, John. She goes, who are you? It's me, honey, open the door. She calls the cops. The cops show up. Sir, you know, do you live here? He pulls out his license. Look, I live here. This is my house. They knock on the door. The woman opens up the door. They say, ma'am, is this your husband? She looks at him. John, what happened to you? That is her first introduction to Islam. Can you imagine? Subhanallah. This is why Allah says, call to the way of your Lord bil hikmah, with wisdom, right? And I think that this is something that we need to take into consideration as converts to this deen.
Jazakallah khair. Hassan?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. You know, as it relates to the custom, the urf, or the aada, you know, the scholars, they have mentioned that there are 4 conditions for a valid custom. and just briefly going over them. The first is that it is a recurring practice that is acceptable to people of sound nature. It has to be something that, everyone understands and can see, oh, this is what you guys do in Rome, in Egypt, whatever. It's acceptable to people of sound nature. The second is that it has to be a practice that is done or found in the majority of people. Cannot be a practice that's just for your block, just for your masjid. It has to be something that is found within the masses of the people for it to be legit, for it to be a valid custom. The third is that the custom does not circumvent a contract. So, we may have a contractual agreement, but then, to get out of the contract, I tell you, well, it's custom here that we do it this way. The custom does not circumvent a contract that we already agreed on. And the fourth, as all of the speakers have mentioned, is that this custom, this tradition doesn't go against the text of the Quran or the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. With that being said, I think one major problem that we have when it comes to custom, I don't believe that the question of our customs, is it okay to have your custom in Islam? I believe that this problem affects the African American community the most, because the rest of the communities, when you sit with them, and I'm talking about the people who don't really know much about their religion, when they tell you Islam, all they tell you is their culture. The whole religion is their culture.
Facts.
You tell them about, like, this is how we slaughter. For example, in my college, there was a sister from Bangladesh. I said, oh, I'm going to go and slaughter. She said, you're going to slaughter? I said, yeah. She goes, it's haram. I said, haram. She goes, back in Bangladesh, the imam goes to everyone's house and slaughters everyone's udhiyah, and that is accepted. If anyone slaughters other than the imam, it's not accepted. And she was dead in total belief in that. And I not only found it in her, but found it in many individuals, that they don't have this problem when it comes to culture, because Islam has been with them for so long that they believe all of their practices is justified in the religion. The problem comes with the African American community. Why? Because although many people are ignorant of the fact that 70% of the Muslims that came on slave ships were Muslims, our traditions, our culture as black people were stripped and ripped from us. And so you find that black people, as you mentioned, that the last thing they want to do is associate with being black, because they have no tradition to begin with. And so with the people who have no tradition, who have no language, who have no country, you find that they are the first to pick the first
Absolutely.
community that's willing to take them
Absolutely.
and follow them. In my neighborhood, I grew up no Muslim friends in the neighborhood. I didn't have any Muslim friends. I didn't go to any Muslim school. I went to public school. I was on the street with everybody else, but I practiced my religion. But the closest community was a Pakistani community. And so I dressed with the shalwar kameez. That's what I wore, because I didn't have any culture or tradition of myself, nothing to grasp. Not because it didn't exist, but because I didn't have any knowledge of it. And although I went to the same masjid and the brothers were welcoming, they were welcoming and more pleased when I looked like them than when I came in to look as I do now, or as myself. So definitely from all of the speakers, as we mentioned, there is a place for the custom and the tradition, as long as it's not going against the text that we have all said. But we all need to look and examine all of our traditions and make sure that they pass that litmus test and that it is acceptable, because there is a lot of false things that we are practicing and that we are attributing to the religion that doesn't belong there.
Jazakumullahu khairan.
Shadi, can I just add one thing quickly?
Sure.
Just talking about the point that you mentioned, that how African American Muslims face this identity, I don't even know what the word I'm looking for is.
Crisis.
But I don't want to call it an identity crisis. I'll get back to the word that I'm thinking for, but what the point I'm trying to make is that as an Indian and Pakistani, the type of racism that I face is not systemic or organized racism, right? It's not institutional racism.
Right.
It's a lapse in judgment. It's a sin that will occur. Whereas with the African American community, when you study the history, and I think this is something that Muslims need to do, is study the history of the African American Muslim community in specific. It's institutional, it's systemic racism that's taking place. And that's very different from the type of racism that other communities will face. And that is why the African American community was, as he mentioned, stripped of their identity, right? Whereas other communities haven't had that done to them. And there's a big difference in terms of calling out racism. A second thing I want to mention is, you know, I know Dr. Abu Zaid, mashallah, the purest of hearts, and you know, a great, you know, scholar in his all due right. And he mentioned the point of mentioning the good in our community. And yes, it's very important to highlight the good. We need to be positive and optimistic people. But in times of crisis, you need to handle the issue. And I tie this into the Black Lives Matter movement. That, you know, they start up this movement, all lives matter. Yes, it's true, all lives do matter. But it's not all lives that are being shot by racist policemen, right?
Exactly.
So that
Allahu
needs to be
Akbar.
addressed as well. That yes,
Allahu
the good needs to
Akbar.
be highlighted in the community, but in this time and space, one deserves more attention. And I just want to share that because I know we're going to be kicked off soon. He's stating
No,
there
we got
staring
all
at
night.
us. It's our night.
Okay, so going deeper, did the Prophet ﷺ deal with pre-Islamic tribalism and discrimination, whether this was based upon color, tribalism, economic status, and or gender? All right, let's talk about gender discrimination, even amongst the pre-Islamic Arabs. Did the Prophet ﷺ deal with any of these different forms of racism or discrimination in the early years of Islam? And if so, what was his approach? So what I would like for each of you to do is look at the categories that I mentioned: discrimination, whether based upon color, tribalism, socioeconomic status, and or gender. And if you believe that the Prophet ﷺ dealt with any of these issues at the early stages of his mission or throughout the duration of his tenure as a prophet and a messenger, what was his approach? How did he handle it? Can you give us some examples from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and how he dealt with these discriminatory matters? And then at the end, why aren't these same issues addressed today in khutbahs and lectures, considering that it is an epidemic in our communities? And I'll let whoever wants to grab the mic first go.
Inshallah, I'll go first. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. One area that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, most definitely he faced these issues as he came into a society, not particularly just to the Arabs, but across the globe. Racism, discrimination of all types, women and the like, were strife. It was everywhere. But to pick one category, as Imam Shadid, he responded, he asked, I would say that the one that I would like to mention is the discrimination of disability. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, an individual, they lived and they worked with their hands, literally. They had to till, they had to protect, they had to fight. And so anyone who didn't have those capacities, they were looked down upon. We look down upon the disabled now with all of the technology that we have. They can walk, they can read, they could drive, and be disabled, you know, cannot stand, cannot walk. And so there's no difference from then and now. And you find that one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah bin Maktoum, the blind man, we are all familiar with the ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, عَبَسَ وَتَوَلَّى أَنْ جَاءَهُ الْأَعْمَى وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّهُ يَزَكَّى. I'm a little bit tired. The blind man, he came to you, and you frowned and you turned away, right? And we're not going to go into the tafsir of the ayah, but we're going to say that this blind individual, he wasn't seen as someone who was really worth the time to be spoken to in that moment, because the Prophet ﷺ was addressing the nobles of Quraysh. And it could be seen today that if someone came in here who was blind, you know, we would kind of leave them at the door unless someone felt sorry to go and assist them. But Islam, it came to empower and to lift up all people. And the way that the Prophet ﷺ helped those who were disabled, specifically the blind, specifically Abdullah bin Maktoum, was that he took an individual who was worthless in the society because of his disability and made him the mu'adhin. Could you imagine an individual whom probably no one would look at? People would say, oh, he's blind, he cannot do for himself, he needs help. No one even wants to hear. And the Prophet put him in the front to be one of the two mu'adhins. So an individual whom the people did not want to hear or did not want to see now became the individual whom his voice caused all of them to rush. His voice caused all of them to come. Now, could you imagine the city of Mecca and the city of Medina when Abdullah bin Maktoum would make the adhan? All of the people, they are waiting on the voice of a blind person to respond. This is empowerment. This is taking someone who was on the fringe of society and putting them in the front and putting them in employment. And it is only now that modern societies are catching up and making rules that people with disability should be employed as well. So that is one disability or one discrimination that was found during the time of the Prophet, and this was just one of the ways in which he raised up those who were targeted, discriminated against.
Jazakallah khairan. Anyone else?
Okay.
Fadal.
So one of the things I mentioned earlier is that the Prophet ﷺ had a different style and a different temperament for dealing with different situations. When it comes to tribalism or racism, you have to understand, first of all, racism wasn't a color thing in pre-modern times, in the time of the Prophet included. It's only in modern time that you have a black and white divide, but racism was more like tribalism. There were different tribes looking down on each other. So the Prophet dealt with that. There was this problem in society. So Muslims were imperfect. They had these issues. So whenever the Prophet dealt with this particular issue, it really irritated him. When you look at his hadith dealing with this topic and how he settled those issues, you'll find this is something the Prophet did not like. And the language he used was very different from the language he used for other situations. So for instance, I'll give you two examples. Coming back from one of the expeditions, Bani al-Mustaliq. So the companions, they got into a scuffle. There was something happened between two individuals. One was from the Ansar, one was from the Muhajirin. Well-known incident. So then, the Muhajirin came to the aid of their brother, the Ansar came to the aid of their brother, and they started calling, Ya al-Muhajirin, Ya al-Ansar. And then the Prophet found out about it. When he found out about it, how did he deal with it? He was so angry. He came swiftly, he rushed towards them. And when he saw them, he couldn't even say anything. He didn't, he didn't give a talk. All he said, Ala ma balu da'wa al-jahiliyyah wa ana fikum. He said, you're still calling on to Jahiliyyah when I'm still here. That's all he could say. He just couldn't get over it. And then all he said to them, he said, Da'uha fa innaha muntina. Leave all of that because it stinks. Because of the language he used here, that it stinks, is despicable, is something not worthy of human beings. There's a second incident that's much more profound, and it shows you that the Prophet had the same type of reaction in dealing with these situations. This is the hadith where he said, لا ينتهين أقوام يفتخرون بآبائهم الذين ماتوا فإنهم فحم جهنم. He said, let people stop boasting about their forefathers, their tribes, their forefathers that passed away, because they are in the hellfire. أو ليكونن أهون على الله, or they shall be in the sight of Allah worse than what? Just imagine, what would you say? These people who are tribalists or racist, they're proud of their ancestors. The Prophet said they're worse than animals. What animal would you use? What I would use as an example, maybe dog, maybe the. He said, min al-ju'al, alladhi yudahdi'u al-khirra'a bi'anfihi. From the dung beetle, worse than in the sight of Allah, more low in the sight of Allah than a dung beetle that rolls around its nose in the dung. It's the same type of metaphor. Now imagine, what was the Prophet saying? He was saying, someone who's proud of his ancestors and he looks down on other people based upon his lineage, he's worse than an animal. He's worse than a human being. He's not worthy of being a human being. But he's like an animal. And among the animals, what did the Prophet choose? An insect. Think about it. An insect is the lowliest type of animal. You want to step on them. They're repulsive. They're ugly. They're despicable. So he used the metaphor of an insect. But not only the insect, now this is going into the irjaz of the Prophet. Out of all the insects he could have chosen, he chose the dung beetle, the scarab beetle. What's the peculiarity about the dung beetle? This is the only animal in the animal kingdom whose source of nourishment is the feces of other animals. Look at the depth of the Prophet's analogy. The only animal that thrives and rolls and that whose excrement, whose food is the excrement of other animals. There was in my workshop I share, there was a scientific study. I'm a physician, by the way, so I look at these studies. There was an interesting study done in 2010 where scientists looked at many species of dung beetles, scarab beetles, and they wanted to see what they were attracted to, what was the nourishment, what was the food that they liked the most. So they put out in the UK different types of excrement from different animals, and they analyzed where these dung beetles were attracted to the most. So among all the different types of excrement they put out there, they realized that, first of all, the dung, the excrement that they were least attracted to was the excrement of cows and livestock, which is considered pure. But the number one was human feces, number two chimpanzee feces, and then dead rats, and then pig feces. Their conclusion was the smellier the excrement, the more attracted this dung beetle was to that type of excrement. So look at the irjaz of the Prophet. This is something, tribal race is something should have no place in society, and it's something that stinks. It's something that's absolutely despicable, not worthy of being a human being.
Due to the time that we have left, inshallah ta'ala, I want to, before I conclude, segue into something I think is very important, and that is the subtle forms of racism that exist in Islamic schools. You have many children of many different backgrounds that attend what we know today as private Islamic schools. And sometimes in these schools, teachers, sometimes who don't even hold degrees, these are not professionally trained teachers. Sometimes these Islamic schools are ran, or administrators of these schools or teachers in these schools are just good brothers and sisters from the mosque, from the masjid, all right, haven't been professionally trained. A lot of these schools sometimes don't have professional development people to come in and train them and help them manage classroom, manage their emotions, manage, other things that go on. And as a result of that, our children become the victims in these schools of a lot of these subtle biases that a lot of the teachers have. African American children, Bangladeshi children, children from races and cultures that are not considered the elite or the dominant culture of that particular school. So as a result of that, there are microaggressions, even from teachers towards these children, all right? When teachers that come from different backgrounds don't understand the behavior of children from other cultures. You have African American children, especially the boys, who are very hyperactive, all right? And we kind of want them to sit down and learn one way because that is what we have been taught in our minds and our environments, that this is the way children are supposed to learn, not understanding the cultural differences in the learning of the children that are in front of them. And so as a result of that, we'll write off this child's behavior as being ADHD, ADD. We'll write off the child's behavior as there's parent problem with the parents at home. Parents are probably not religious. The children don't know Quran. They don't know Arabic. They don't know. And these children are stuck in these classes with teachers that are unfortunately taking their aggressions out on these children. And it is our responsibility to raise awareness about this in our schools. A lot of the administrators, especially if they are African American teachers in a lot of these schools, are silent about the issues that they see going on, the microaggressions, the subtle biases towards these children in the Islamic schools, because they are afraid of losing their jobs, of bringing this issue up to the administration, taking it up the chain of a hierarchy in the board or the administration, not saying anything about it or even chiming in on the, uh, these, the microaggressions towards these children, and it has to stop. So I have a sister here tonight, inshallah ta'ala, that I want to give her a few minutes to kind of express what she expressed on a video that was spread on Instagram. Sister Nadira, are you here? Okay. So I'm going to give you the mic, inshallah ta'ala, for a few minutes to kind of express to us as a group here, as a body, as an ummah here, about some of the things that you mentioned in your video, inshallah, on YouTube. On Instagram, inshallah. Nope, you can stay right there.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. First of all, I want to commend Brother Shadid and all the panelists for even having a discussion about this, because like everyone said, it's something that we don't want to talk about, especially since in the society that we live in, so many horrible and false labels have been given to Islam that we don't even want to believe that these things are possible in our community. But understand that when you try to silence it, we suffer. And I always tell people that, inshallah, we hope to make it to Jannah, but inshallah, when we get there, we're not going to be alone. So when you look at your brothers and sisters, look at it as these are the people that I'm going to be next to in Jannah. You know, when I have a house made of diamonds in Jannah, she's going to have one next door to me. And that'll help you look with a lot more compassion, a lot more understanding. And when I heard about the situation that happened in Maryland, I was just in mourning, because I've been that only black girl in a predominantly Arab and Desi school. I've been the one where the first day of 7th grade, I had an Arabic teacher tell me, you and the black girl separate so you don't cause any trouble. And when you're in that stage in your life, you're learning about who you are and you're learning about your value in the world. And it made me look and say, okay, well, maybe black Muslims, they treat us like secondhand Muslims. And now that I'm kind of well known on Instagram, people will come up to me and they'll be like, oh my God, tell us about your convert story. And I get them so excited and I say, well, on my birthday, I came at my mom and I gave her the salams and I was a Muslim. For you to automatically assume that because I'm black, there's no way Allah gave her the blessing of being born into a Muslim family. She's black. And I'm 5th generation Muslim, and I know black Muslims born in America who are even further down the line than I am. So I just want to say that in order for this racism to properly be addressed, I need you to learn. I'm not telling you to go out and hunt down a black Muslim and be like, tell me about yourself. Because I've had people do that. It's very weird. It's very uncomfortable. I don't like it. But what I'm telling you is to learn and to really address the biases. And when you learn, teach your families. There's no way you should have a grandma that's been in America for 35, 40 years, she doesn't know about slavery. There's no way you should have parents that are in America and they don't know that it's not acceptable to say the N-word. There's no way that you should have children that think that their black classmates are converts, that think that their parents are converts. So I need you to learn, and then when you learn, I need you to teach others, because when you don't, we suffer. And the discrimination and the racism, I can feel it. I can see it. There are times where I've avoided massages because I'm like, the racism, I really don't want to put up with it this Friday. So I'm going to go to my own masajid where I'm made to feel comfortable, where people aren't looking at me weird, where people aren't second-guessing me, where I don't have to do so much to prove, like he said. I've had Muslims come up to me and be like, do you pray? I'm like, excuse me? And being that child, I mourned so much for this girl that felt the need to take her own life, because I've been in that position where I tried to assimilate to Arab culture, because they told me that being black was shameful. So when I would go to their parties, I would dress like them. I learned to belly dance. I said everything in Arabic. I broke my tongue to sound like them. I learned their words. But then I would go to school and I would be put in remedial Arabic and Quran classes when I could read, write, and understand, when I could memorize the page of Quran a day. And I felt that as a black Muslim, I wasn't enough. And I know how that little girl felt, because I was that little girl that didn't feel like enough, that constantly felt like nothing I could do, there was nothing I could say for them to really feel like I was their sister in Islam. So as a community, what you can do to address this racism is to really look your family in the face and say, Mom, you're a racist. I'm a racist, my dad is a racist. That's the nicest thing you can do for us, is to address it and be like, yo, you can't say the N-word. That's not your place, bro. You know? And it's hard, it's difficult. It's difficult, it's hard to really say, you know what, I'm a racist. I discriminated, I prejudged her. But that's what we need from you.
And by the N-word, she means nigga.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I
You
can say it.
You cannot say nigga.
And
When
just
you
to
hear
add,
your brothers saying nigga at home, you have to be able, as a woman or as a man, to step in and say, that's wrong. You can't say that. If you don't say that, then you are just as guilty. You are just as guilty. And we think that that is cool. You don't have a pass to use the word nigga. You don't have a pass to use that. I don't care how cool you are. I mean, Hispanics, Puerto Ricans, they get a pass. That goes without saying. That goes without saying. But at the same token, you don't have a pass. I'm sorry to cut you off, sis. There was a video that went viral on Twitter where a professor was asked by a Caucasian, why can't I use the word nigger? That is discriminatory because you're saying everybody can use the word nigger, but I can't say it. And his response to that was, that comes from a place of privilege. That is white privilege. You believe that you can say and do and go and say whatever you want to say without any restrictions. And it doesn't work like that. This is not your world. You don't have that privilege. So when you're at home and your brothers are joking or your sisters are joking, nah, nigga, nah, stop, nigga. No, you have to step in and say, you can't say that. You hear your parents referring to an African or an African-American Muslim as Abid. Haram alaik. Why are you Jews? And where's that okay? Zinji, which is the Arabic word for nigger. Yeah, they have it in their language as well. I've been called that in Saudi Arabia. Zinji, anta zinji. You're a nigger. Anta abid. And it goes on, even in Islamic schools, and it has to stop. And it stops when we start saying, I am no longer going to tolerate that. And we need to begin to educate our families by saying, no, you cannot use that word, and this is why. I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
That's okay. And just to add on to that is a lot of people would be like, oh, why can't we say the word nigga? Because you have not experienced life as a nigga. Ooh. You don't know what it's like to live as a nigga. You don't know what it's like to be a part of a system. And I have a little brother that goes to a predominantly Arab and Desi school. And you don't know how many calls a day I get. His gym teacher called me and said he plays too much in gym class. He's in 4th grade. What is he supposed to be doing? But I know that it's because he's black, and I mourn because I can see that now that he's starting to see, it's because he's black. So you need to address this, and please don't tell me to be patient with it. I'm 21 years old. I've been in Arab community since I was born. My patience is wearing thin. And may Allah continue to increase me in patience.
Amen.
But it's time for you to get yourself together for the betterment of all of us. Because it's completely unacceptable on every level. You cannot say nigga, you cannot treat me differently because I'm black. It's completely unacceptable. And that's the end of it. And may Allah reward all of us for our efforts. And may He cure us of the diseases of our heart. And may He bless you to be able to see the evil within yourself so that you may change it.
Ameen.
And I appreciate your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So as we conclude, and this was in no way, shape, or form designed, this platform wasn't designed to shame anyone, to make any, we are trying to raise awareness of a problem in our communities. You have your Islamic leaders here. We have brothers and sisters in the crowd that have had firsthand experiences with this. This is real. It's
Shadid.
not a figment of our imaginations.
I want to just add,
Fadl.
my daughter, she went through serious bullying when we first came to New Jersey, and I put her in one of the Islamic schools. And I want to mention it because parents need to look at their behavior of their children. As soon as behavior begins to change, you need to start asking yourself why. My daughter is someone who loved school. And all of a sudden, she would wake up in the morning, I don't want to go to school. And we're wondering, what's going on? Till I go pick her up one day, and she has this scratch across her eye. So I'm like, what happened? And she's like, no, it's okay, nothing. And I'm like, no, what happened? And she tells me that someone pushed her off of a chair, and she hit her face across the box. And then I start finding out that she was actually being bullied and abused. When she would sit at the table, all of the other girls would get up and leave. Stuff you see in a movie, right? And my first reaction, right, is teach her the two-piece with the elbow, it goes away, right? But we're Muslim, right? I don't want to teach my daughter that she should put her hands and harm another Muslim, right? The blood of a Muslim is haram. But when I brought this to the principal and to the people in charge, there was no action taken, to the point that I had to remove my daughter out of the school. And to this point, it still has affected the way she interacts, the way she goes out and tries to take lead to do things, because she doesn't want to go through that same thing again. So be very cautious, pay attention to the behavior of your children, because this stuff is real and it does happen.
And here's this one right here. Okay, Jazakumullahu khairan. You need one second.
One of the things that the Sheikh talked about that we didn't address is the Prophet ﷺ, he came into the employ of Sister Khadija radiallahu anha as someone who enhanced her business. She was an established businesswoman. She was the owner of the New England Patriots, and he was her Tom Brady. She was an established businesswoman, and this speaks to an issue that Imam Shadid was bringing, gender equality. And to have the sister come up forward and speak so eloquently as a woman, as a sister, about an issue that we all face is really something that is different, and I notice a change. We would not have seen this in our community 10 years ago. And so I want to encourage our sisters to take their rightful place in their positions of leadership. If your wife is a CPA, you're not telling her how to make financial decisions. You're asking her to advise you how to make financial decisions. And if she's a surgeon, you're definitely not telling her how to perform surgery. So the sisters are coming into a position of leadership based on their own scholarship. My daughter has 2 master's degrees and is now working on her principal certificate. I can't hold a candle to her in terms of education, and I don't. I learn from her. And so it is something that is different about our communities, that now women are coming forward, but they're given an opportunity to establish themselves as mashayikh in their respective fields. We understand and we know you're not trying to be imam and lead us in salah, and so we shouldn't be fearful or feel challenged by women who are powerful, who are intellectual, and who are scholars in their own right, inshallah.
Allahu Akbar.
Okay, so do we got time for one question? Did anybody have a question, or did we just kind of address everything? Okay, everybody good? Can you give my panelists a round of applause? Jazakumullahu khairan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all for your husnul istima', for your good listening, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you all, my panelists, for your contribution to this discussion. Hopefully, this is one of many discussions that will continue to happen and reverberate throughout our communities as we challenge this hurdle that is amongst the many hurdles that are going to confront us in our communities. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.